What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another video here on my YouTube channel today. So today I'll be going over the life and career of one of the greatest professional wrestlers of all time, one of my favorite wrestlers of all time, my top three. We're doing a life and career video here today on Latino Heat Eddie Guerrero. So Eddie Guerrero was born Eduardo Gory Guerrero Leonis, it's something like that, on October 9th, 1967. He is part of the legendary Guerrero family. He was born in El Paso, Texas in 1967. He has 3 children that he had with his wife Vicky Guerrero. You guys know Vicky Guerrero. Used to Vicky, you know about Vicky Guerrero. And he died November 13th, 2005 in Minneapolis, Minnesota. His cause of death was acute heart failure, but we'll get more into that later in the video. Some of his ring names: Black Tiger, Eddie Guerrero, etc. He was trained by Gory Guerrero, and he made his debut September 5th, 1986. So let's go over some of Eddie Guerrero's accomplishments in professional wrestling. He was a AAA tag team champion. He was a ECW television champion 2 times. He was a IWA Mid-South heavyweight champion. He was a LAWA heavyweight champion, and he won the Best of the Super Juniors 3 in 1995, 6, somewhere around that. I think it was 5. He was also WCW Cruiserweight Champion. He was a WCW US Champion. He was a WWE European Champion 2 times. He was a WWE US Champion, and a WWE Intercontinental Champion, a WWE Tag Team Champion 4 times. He is a 2006 WWE Hall of Famer, and he was the WWE Champion. So Eddie Guerrero would start in WCW in 1989. Eddie's first WCW run wasn't really nothing big. He just started out being like a jobber to the big stars. Then Eddie Guerrero would go to AAA, and he would be the first wrestler to unmask by choice. And he formed a team with El Helio del Santo, and their team was called, sorry if I butcher the name, I'm sorry here, El Parissa Atomic, I think is what it was called. And their team ended when Eddie Guerrero turned on Del Santo and aligned with Art Barr, as they would form they would form a team in AAA. He lined up with Art Barr, and they would team amongst with other wrestlers, El Gringos Locos, as a team in AAA. In 1992, Eddie would leave AAA, and he would go to New Japan Pro Wrestling, beginning in New Japan as Black Tiger. Eddie Guerrero would win a tournament and get a shot for the New Japan World title. but he was unsuccessful at gaining that. Then Eddie Guerrero would leave AAA or leave New Japan, and he would go to the famous promotion ECW. As Eddie Guerrero, he would have a series of matches with the likes of Dean Malenko. He had some great matches with Dean Malenko and ECW. Once revealed by Paul Heyman, ECW went on with their first pay per view in 1996. It was gonna be I believe for the ECW Championship, Chris Benoit versus Eddie Guerrero. I think that would have been the main event of ECW's first ever pay per view if they went on 96, but they didn't. They went on 97, and Eddie and Chris had left the company by then, so that did not happen. In 1995. In 1995, Eddie Guerrero and Dean Malenko would leave ECW, and they would sign with WCW. Eddie Guerrero in WCW, he would feud with the likes of Ric Flair. He feuded with Diamond Dallas Page for the U.S. Championship, as Eddie Guerrero would win the U.S. Championship from DDP, and he would go on to have matches with the likes of Scott Norton, Six in a ladder match, Chris Jericho. But he lost it in a match versus Dean Malenko. Then Eddie Guerrero would move on to his feud with Rey Mysterio in WCW over the Cruiserweight Championship. And this happened the match at Halloween Havoc 1997 with Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio, the awesome match at Halloween Havoc. Eddie would win the title back from Rey Mysterio, and he would defend it against I believe Dean Malenko at Starrcade. He would retain against Dean Malenko at Starrcade, and he would lose the championship to the Ultimo Dragon the following night on Nitro. In 1998, they would start a storyline with Eddie Guerrero and his nephew Chavo, where Chavo Guerrero was made Eddie Guerrero's slave. Chavo would accompany Eddie, and Eddie would accompany Chavo to their matches. But then towards the end of that, Eddie had saved Chavo attack from Stevie Ray. But Eddie Guerrero would face off against his nephew Chavo at Starrcade in a hair versus hair match, which Eddie won. And then he would save Chavo from an attack from Stevie Ray. But Eddie Guerrero would request his release from WCW in 1998. Around 1998. But Eddie Guerrero left WCW for a few months, and then he would. Well, Eddie wanted his release, but Eric Bischoff wouldn't give it to him, so Eddie just left WCW for a few months. Then Eddie would return to WCW in 1999, and he would return cutting a shoot promo on Eric Bischoff about how Eric Bischoff has poorly treated him and a bunch of all the Mexican wrestlers that are in WCW. And then Eddie Guerrero in 1999 would form the LWO, the Latino World Order. But on New Year's Day in 1999, Eddie Guerrero would be involved in a car accident because around this time Eddie was Eddie Guerrero was addicted to drugs, and alcohol. He had trouble with alcohol, and it just wasn't a perfect time in Eddie Guerrero's life. Um, so he would, uh, with Eddie getting arrested, Eddie getting a car accident and have to sit home, the LWO kind of disbanded, and the LWO kind of didn't continue after that incident sadly happened with Eddie. But Eddie Guerrero would return to WCW in May of 1999. The LWO formed in March, and Eddie would return in May, and he would start the stable, the Filthy Animals, with Conan. At one point, they tried to get Rey Mysterio to join their group, but Rey Mysterio wouldn't join. And then early on in 1999, Vince Russo was fired from WCW. And he was replaced by Kevin Sullivan. And now Eddie Guerrero wasn't really a big fan of Kevin Sullivan. Neither was Chris Benoit. Neither was Perry Saturn. Neither was Dean Malenko, because he felt that with Vince Russo leaving and Kevin Sullivan being put in Vince's place, that he wouldn't be treated right. So around the end of 1999, Eddie Guerrero would request his release from WC. Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Dean Malenko, and Perry Saturn would request their release from WCW, and they were granted it. And a few weeks later, Eddie Guerrero, Chris Benoit, Perry Saturn, and Dean Malenko would show up on an episode of Monday Night Raw in January of 2000, as they were sitting in the crowd watching the match that was about to go on. And Eddie and Jim Ross and Jerry Lawler would point out that those four were sitting in the front row. And then all four men would attack the Road Dogg, as the four men would beat down on the New Age Outlaws in the ring, with the infamous thing, them all doing moves on Road Dogg and Billy Gunn. So it was revealed that Mick Foley had brought the Radicals in. They started off as a face faction, as Mick Foley. Mick Foley brought them into the WWF. That was revealed. And Eddie Guerrero in his debut match on SmackDown, he would dislocate his elbow doing a frog splash on Billy Gunn, I believe. I think it would be the Billy Gunn or Road Dogg. And then on an episode of Raw, Triple H would reveal that he had given the Radicals contracts that they agreed on one thing, and that one thing was turning heel on Mick Foley and beating down Mick Foley. And then the Radicals would team. But on the night after WrestleMania 16, 2000, whatever you want to call it, he would again show feelings for WWF women's wrestler at the time, Chyna, and then Chyna would turn on her ally Chris Jericho, forming with Eddie, and Eddie and Chyna would be together. You guys know how the whole Eddie Guerrero and Chyna storyline, Eddie calling her Mamacita and all this funny stuff. Them coming in Backlash 2000 after Eddie got back from Eddie's prom, as they said. But unfortunately, Eddie would be caught with 3 of the Godfather's hoes in the shower by China, and that would be forming cracks in their relationship until Eddie Guerrero would finally turn on China as the Radicals were reforming at the hands of Triple H to help take out Triple H's rival at the time, Stone Cold Steve Austin. But around the beginning of 2001, Chris Benoit would leave the Radicals to focus on his own singles career. So then the Radicals would be just a form of Eddie Guerrero, Perry Saturn, and Dean Malenko. Then around WrestleMania 17, Eddie would take on Test for the European Championship, and he would defeat Test. So then, a little bit later on in 2001, the Radicals would disband for good, and Eddie Guerrero was trying to align himself with the Hardy Boys and Lita. But the Hardys and Lita didn't think they could trust Eddie and all this stuff, so Eddie had to prove that they could trust him and all this stuff. But Eddie Guerrero would kayfabe get injured in a match with Albert. So Eddie Guerrero would miss the whole Invasion storyline due to this kayfabe injury. But in November of 2001, Eddie Guerrero would be released by the WWF. Because he was arrested for drunk driving in November of 2001. So therefore, WWE had no alternative but to unfortunately release Eddie from his contract. Because around this time, Eddie was fighting addiction, and but after his release in 2001, Eddie Guerrero would work some of the independent circuit, WWA, World Wrestling All Stars. He would compete on Ring of Honor's first ever pay-per-view in 2002. But in April of 2002, after overcoming addiction and getting his life back on track, Eddie Guerrero would return to the WWF, attacking Intercontinental Champion Rob Van Dam on an episode of Raw. I don't know if it was the first Raw after WrestleMania 18 or like the Raw after, the second Raw after WrestleMania 18. So Eddie and RVD would go on to have a few good matches. Backlash 2002, Insurrection 2002, and one at Judgment Day 2002. And during this feud, Eddie Guerrero would defeat RVD for the Intercontinental Championship, and Eddie Guerrero would win the Intercontinental Championship from RVD. Eddie Guerrero would lose. Wait a minute, I forgot something. When Eddie was on the independent circuit, he had went back to Japan and wrestled a couple matches in Japan before returning to the WWE in April of 2002, attacking Rob Van Dam. In July of 2002, RVD and Eddie Guerrero would have their infamous ladder match on Raw, where RVD would win and regain the Intercontinental Championship. But earlier in that night, Chris Benoit had returned from neck surgery after injuring his neck in 2001. Eddie would help Stone Cold Steve Austin fight off Eddie Guerrero and Ric Flair. But Chris Benoit would turn heel on Stone Cold Steve Austin, aligning with Eddie Guerrero and Ric Flair. In August 2002, Eddie Guerrero and Chris Benoit would move to SmackDown. But Eddie and Chris would quit teaming as Eddie Guerrero would team with Chavo Guerrero to form Los Guerreros. Los Guerreros would team for a while. They would had some great matches with Angle and Benoit, Edge and Mysterio. They won the tag titles at Survivor Series in 2002. So yeah, Los Guerreros pretty much dominated the rest of 2002 and half of 2003. Guys remember with all the segments with Los Guerreros to be lying, cheating, and stealing, which was their motto. In 2003, Chavo would be injured. He would injure his shoulder, and Eddie would go be a single star for a few months. As Eddie would win the United States Championship, incarcerated a United States Championship from Chris Benoit Vengeance 2003 in the tournament. In 2003, Eddie would defend the U.S. title in some great matches. But when Chavo returned to help Eddie Guerrero, with Eddie Guerrero's feud with the Big Show, Eddie Guerrero would unfortunately lose the United States Championship to the Big Show at No Mercy in 2003. And after that, you kind of see some cracks in Los Guerreros, if you would say. And then Los Guerreros would lose the tag team titles, and then cracks would really be forming in Los Guerreros. And in 2004, in a rematch for the tag team championships with the Basham Brothers, Chavo Guerrero would shockingly turn on Eddie, beating down Eddie Guerrero in January of 2004, as they would have a match at the Royal Rumble in 2004, and it really wasn't that long of a feud. But then Eddie Guerrero would win a 15-man Royal Rumble match on SmackDown, getting a shot at WWE Champion Brock Lesnar at No Way Out in 2004. And then Eddie Guerrero would triumph it at No Way Out in 2004, defeating Brock Lesnar for the WWE Championship with the help of Goldberg, as Goldberg and Brock Lesnar were feuding at the time. And Eddie Guerrero would win the WWE Championship from Brock Lesnar. This was Eddie Guerrero's first World Championship he had won. It was a good emotional title win and a pretty good moment. And then Eddie Guerrero would go into a feud with Kurt Angle, and they would face off at WrestleMania 20 in a great match. But after that, Kurt Angle would be injured. And Eddie Guerrero would go into a feud with John Bradshaw Layfield. And them two would have a match at Judgment Day 2004, where Eddie Guerrero would be busted open real bad. It was one of the bloodiest matches I've seen. Then at the Great American Bash, in a bull rope match, JBL would unfortunately defeat Eddie Guerrero for the WWE Championship. In their final match on SmackDown in July, in a steel cage match, Kurt Angle returned and cost Eddie Guerrero the WWE Championship. And Kurt Angle and Eddie Guerrero would continue their feud. They had a great match at SummerSlam. Eddie Guerrero faced Luther Reigns at No Mercy that year. Eddie Guerrero's team faced Kurt Angle's team at Survivor Series in 2004, with Eddie Guerrero's team getting the victory. Eddie and Kurt competed in the Lumberjack match, a 2 out of 3 Falls match on SmackDown 2004. And then Survivor Series would be their final match in their rivalry. And Eddie Guerrero in December of 2004, he would get another shot at the WWE Championship in a fatal four match that included The Undertaker, JBL, and Booker T. JBL would retain the championship. Eddie Guerrero could not win the title. Eddie Guerrero was the #1 entrant in the 2005 Royal Rumble matchup. Then Eddie Guerrero won the tag team titles with Rey Mysterio at No Way Out 2005 against the Basham Brothers. Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero would also face off at WrestleMania 21. It was the first time tag team champions had ever faced off against each other. But around April, May, in May of 2005, Eddie Guerrero would shockingly turn heel on Rey Mysterio, and as Eddie and Rey Mysterio would start their awesome feud in 2005. You know, they had a match at Judgment Day. They had a match at the Great American Bash. And then they had a match on SmackDown in June of 2005. And in SummerSlam, they had a custody for Dominic ladder match, as Eddie Guerrero was trying to take away Rey Mysterio's son. But Rey Mysterio won the ladder match, getting the custody of Dominic. And then they were in their feud in a steel cage match on SmackDown in September of 2005. And the next week, Teddy Long and Paul Marcannon would be in the ring announcing Batista's next challenger for his World Heavyweight Championship. And as Teddy Long was about to announce Rey Mysterio, but Paul Marcannon would interrupt Teddy and actually would call out Eddie Guerrero as Batista's next opponent. And Batista and Eddie Guerrero would feud. Eddie Guerrero would be trying to beat Batista's friend, but Batista was seeing right through it. He didn't trust Eddie because of what he did to Rey Mysterio in their feud. And they would end up in a match at No Mercy in 2005, and sadly this would be Eddie Guerrero's last pay-per-view match. And Batista would defeat Eddie Guerrero. Eddie Guerrero could not win the World Heavyweight Championship. But sadly, on November 11th, 2005, Eddie Guerrero would wrestle his last match on SmackDown against Mr. Kennedy in a Survivor Series qualifying match. Because sadly, on November 13th, 2005, Eddie Guerrero would be found dead in a Minneapolis hotel before the tapings of Raw and SmackDown that night. Eddie Guerrero was found by Chavo. As Chavo was trying to save his uncle's life. But sadly, Chavo Guerrero could not save Eddie. And unfortunately, as the paramedics got there, they pronounced Eddie Guerrero dead. And then Chavo Guerrero, as Chavo Guerrero said on Dark Side of the Ring, that Eddie Guerrero would die in Chavo's arms, which is real sad if you think about it. An uncle finding his a nephew finding his uncle dead. It just ain't the right scene you would want to walk into. So after Eddie Guerrero sadly passed away, Chavo Guerrero would inform Vince McMahon and WWE management that Eddie Guerrero passed away today. Chavo would break the news to everybody in the WWE. So the original storylines for Raw and SmackDown were scrapped that night. And in honor of Eddie Guerrero, they would hold the Eddie Guerrero tribute show on November 13th's episode of Raw. The show started up with all the wrestlers standing on the stage, as Vince McMahon had a microphone in his hand, and he would announce to the crowd that Eddie Guerrero had passed away. And Vince McMahon would give a speech about Eddie, how he loved the business, how he loved wrestling in front of the fans, and Eddie did. Eddie really enjoyed wrestling. He really enjoyed uh, wrestling for all the people. So, as on the stage, you see a bunch of the wrestlers crying. Chavo, Ray, uh, Triple H was crying. Big Show was crying. Um, uh, Shelton Benjamin was tearing up. Everybody was tearing up because it was such a horrible day. Nobody expected it, especially Chavo, especially especially Crispin. Crispin Waugh did not expect this at all. Neither did WWE and Vince McMahon. Um, you could tell when Vince was talking, Vince McMahon was really upset. Because the people really hit the most was Vince was really torn up about it. If you heard Bruce Pritchard's podcast, Something Else to Wrestle With, Bruce revealed that he was really messed up about it. Um, it was it was a really bad day in professional wrestling. And then WWE would do a 10-bell salute to Eddie Guerrero, and then they would show a video package with clips of Eddie Guerrero with Johnny Cash's song "Hurt" over it. Looking back on the video, it's a really emotional video because nobody really expected this today. Nobody really expected it that day. And then Vince McMahon would really aggressively say Eddie Guerrero's catchphrase "Viva la Raza" as the crowd cheered, and you heard the "Thank You Eddie" chants. A pretty much one of the most emotional openings for a Raw. And during the show, wrestlers would wrestle some matches that were dedicated to Eddie. Also, some superstars would give their thoughts on Eddie and their memories of Eddie. Rey Mysterio would beat Shawn Michaels. They would hug in the ring. And at the ending, John Cena would defeat Randy Orton, as John Cena would take his Eddie Guerrero shirt off, lay it in the middle of the ring, take his WWE Championship, lie it across Eddie's shirt as John Cena left the ring, and the camera focused on the belt and the Eddie shirt as Raw went to black, and that episode of Raw ended a pretty emotional ending if you look at it. Also, the SmackDown taping was a tribute to Eddie. Batista starts off riding out Eddie Guerrero's lowrider, and wrestlers dedicate their matches to Eddie. TNA would dedicate their Genesis pay-per-view to Eddie Guerrero. Ring of Honor would hold a pay-per-view called a Night of Tribute in tribute of Eddie Guerrero. OVW would do the same thing with some wrestlers wrestling on there. And the likes of Ray, Chavo, Christian did Eddie Guerrero's Frog Splash in their matches on Raw and at Genesis. Also, CZW did a 10-bell salute to Eddie at the start of their show. And during the 10-bell salute, some fan, I don't know if he was either drunk or if he just had no respect or something like that. During the 10-bell salute, he would yell out, "F that." And CZW would finish the 10-bell salute, and everybody would, all the superstars, Eddie Kingston, if you look at it, Eddie Kingston's there.